Hello, I am Sandra Villas, a partner with Oliver Wyman. I'm very excited today to have Dorothy Maseke here with us. She is the Nature Finance and Taskforce for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures lead at FSD Africa, and she is the head of the African Natural Capital Alliance. Hi, Dorothy.
Thank you for having me, Sandra.
Dorothy, over half of Africa's GDP is dependent on nature, and yet Africa's loss of nature exceeds the global average. What is behind this trend?
25% of global biodiversity actually sits in Africa. Another thing is 65% of the world's arable land is in Africa. We have an expanding population at about 1.3 and more billion people. Mostly a very youthful population. Actually, they say a couple of years back, more than 70% of Africa's population is below the age of 30. Now, this is a population that needs to eat. It needs to work. It needs to feed. It needs to survive. And with these vast resources that we have, and the fact that there's a large population, and the fact that this population needs or depends on agriculture, depends on mining, then it means that nature is at risk, because trees may have to be cut down to provide space for agriculture. Sections of natural habitats may have to be sadly destroyed to make room for exploitation of these minerals, or these vast minerals that we have within the continent. And so when you look at all this combination of factors, then you realize that nature is actually at risk. And unless something is done, then it will not be a very sustainable future for, again, this ever-expanding youthful population.
And with this challenge that you've outlined, what is at stake if this trend continues?
You cannot separate nature from climate. They are inextricably linked. And, nature has a big role in managing, actually they say more than a third of the climate risks or the climate issues that we are facing. One, by, just our forests absorbing carbon, reducing temperatures, and many other factors. And just the linkages with nature and climate are too closely linked. And so what this basically means is, if you don't do something about nature, then it means that climate risks are going to continue. It basically means that the world gets warmer. It basically means that Africa, which is unfortunately the most vulnerable, then gets into great challenges.
Let's talk a little bit about you, Dorothy. You left a successful career in financial services, and you left that to take up this role leading the African Natural Capital Alliance and the Nature Finance lead at FSD Africa. Can you tell us what drove you to do that?
That's a very interesting question, Sandra, and you're really making me think. Why did I do that? I wanted to wake up and know that I'm making a real difference. But I got to a point where I felt that that difference needed to scale. It needed to go beyond, the institutions that I had worked for. It needed to go beyond the boundaries, the geographical boundaries that I was working within. And I felt that, my passion was geared towards making difference continentally, and just going out there and saying, look, I'm really passionate about Africa. I really am. I mean, it's a beautiful continent. We are blessed with immense resources, extremely talented people, a youthful population. When you look at all those components, there's no better. Well, for me, there's no better place to be than to be an African working in Africa at this point in time.
So Dorothy, can you tell us a little bit more about the African Natural Capital Alliance, or ANCA?
ANCA's main focus initially was fully financial services, and that's big, and that's very important. But as we progressed, we realized the need for finance to actually speak to science. And so with time, we started bringing in conservation agencies. We started bringing in research and academia. We have knowledge partners that we've had to bring in. I think when we set up ANCA, initially it was, let's collaborate, let's try and bring all these parties together, let's see what we can do. So with time, it's become clearer in terms of what we aim to achieve. I think at the beginning it was more of, okay, so we have these 9 founding institutions. Can we get to 10? Can we get to 15? Can we get to 20? Can we get to 40? So it's one thing, like I said, to talk about the numbers, but I think the most important step, and ANCA members have taken that into account, it's about seeing now real solutions on the table, seeing real solutions being rolled out to the market.
So ANCA, the African Natural Capital Alliance, is trying to achieve quite a lot, and by the sounds of things is being quite successful at bringing together all these different communities that typically would speak different languages, the financial services, etc. How does ANCA achieve that? Do you have structures in place? Do you have working groups set up? How do you get all these different communities to speak to each other?
Getting everyone on the table was a first step. And, getting, like I said, finance, law, financial institutions, scientists, research, thought leaders, experts, etc., having them on one table, I think was actually the first step. The second step was now having them on this table, ensuring they fully understand what the agenda or the mission of ANCA is, working towards catalyzing nature-positive economies. These institutions then made a commitment. And like I said, if it's not said, if it's not measured, it will not get done. And so these institutions made a commitment, what you call the Nature Voices Pledge. And the main components of that pledge, one, they indicate and they acknowledge that nature has an important role to play. Secondly, they purpose to actually put nature at the heart of strategy and at the heart of decision making. And thirdly, they also purpose towards responsible business from a nature, and like I said, nature is linked to climate, so when you do nature, you've done quite a bit on the climate side. And that also involves or includes coming up with solutions that actually address the nature challenge. So bringing them to the table, having them make these commitments, what you call the Nature Voices Pledge, and so proud that we launched it at the Africa Climate Summit that Kenya had the pleasure of hosting in early September, and Oliver Wyman, you were very helpful in that process. And just having these institutions sit back, review the pledge, give commitments, or review the pledge, look at the commitments in that pledge, give their feedback, and publicly declare that they will actually take nature into account was a huge step. Then now comes the process of implementation or actualizing. So it's one thing to pledge and say, it's another thing to actually put the boots on the ground to do the job. And so with that, as ANCA, and of course with your help at Oliver Wyman, we are supporting African Natural Capital Alliance institutions to actually implement or to actually put in place strategies to work towards these commitments.
Thank you for shedding some light on that for us, Dorothy. Can you tell us, in building the African Natural Capital Alliance, you brought on advisors to help, and we in particular, Oliver Wyman, have been part of the process. What made you decide to bring advisors on?
I'll go back to the word advisors. So what's the role of an advisor? Someone with the technical competencies that may be lacking. And so that was the real driver behind bringing Oliver Wyman on board. Nature is a new field. And I must confess, I'm not an ecologist. I don't have a PhD in plant or animal science. you know. I wish I did now that I'm in this role. But and because of that, there was a need to bring in experts who have a good understanding of both components. The components of finance, which is very strong and for which FSD Africa, you know, focuses on, because our role is to catalyze financial markets. But then an advisor who also understands various economies and how they operate. And then an advisor who also understands the science side of it. So that, you know, when all these three are put together, then as the African Natural Capital Alliance, then it's easier for us to move forward faster. It's easier for us to even know what we want to achieve. So like I said, initially the dream, you know, when you start off an initiative, you kind of know the what you want, but you don't fully know the how to get there. And so the what was very clear: catalyze, nature positive, African economies, focusing on nature. That was the what. But how would we get there? And so bringing in Oliver Wyman helped us in terms of mapping out the how.
Can you give a little bit of a sneak preview about some of the solutions that you think will be coming down the pipe from the institutions that are part of the African Natural Capital Alliance?
Yes,
maybe some of the types of things that are being thought of as solutions on the ground.
Yeah, so engaging with our members, some of them are already thinking of sustainability linked, you know, bonds. So basically bonds of, you know, bonds that actually pay out based on a fulfillment of certain sustainability criteria. Linked to that, of course, conservation bonds. And this is interesting because conservation also touches on wildlife. So we have some institutions that are already thinking of, you know, wildlife conservation bonds, especially institutions that are, you know, are within countries that are heavily reliant on tourism. But then we also have guarantee type solutions. So I'll give this example. Any conservation or any nature-related financial solution is risky by all standards. I mean, telling an investor to put in, an institutional investor, say in Europe or, you know, in another market, to put in, you know, to risk their capital to actually invest in a bond in Africa is not that easy. So they may want to, they have this requirement or need to actually do good, but they also need to protect their capital. And so it becomes very risky business. And so as financial institutions, then that aspect leads to quite a number of challenges. And so some of the products and solutions we've seen ANCA members thinking about are guarantee type solutions, which will de-risk investment in nature and biodiversity within the continent.
Can you tell us, just looking forward now, Dorothy, for you personally, what are you most excited about for the next 10 years?
When I look at the African Natural Capital Alliance, I think my dream is to see the African Natural Capital Alliance playing its role in literally supporting resilience of economies, whether it's through, you know, building a new bioeconomy, or whether it's through just focusing on the risk side to ensure that, you know, countries remain resilient, because there's a difference between remaining resilient and then pursuit of new opportunities.